All right, helping me close it down tonight, a legend in the cookbook writing realm, especially when it comes to live fire landscape. Last time he was on, we were talking about Weber's greatest hits, and this time around, we are talking about the new effort entitled Weber's Ultimate Grilling, a step-by-step guide to barbecue genius. It is available for sale, so let's go ahead and race to the Fogo Charcoal Hotline and welcome back friend of the show, Jamie Purviance. Jamie, how are you, buddy?
I'm great, Greg. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Appreciate you making time for the show as always. And, well, let me ask you right off the bat. I asked my last guest, Sam, the cooking guy who's kind of out in your neck of the woods. I don't know what kind of a sports fan you are, per se, but do you prognosticate a NBA final matchup?
Well, I heard you talking about sports. I'm much more of a hockey fan than that. Sorry, excuse for a Canadian that you were talking to.
Right.
I grew up in New England and played hockey a lot, and now live out in California where we have the Sharks, who are doing remarkably well. They're in Game 7 tomorrow, so that's kind of where my attention is.
Jamie Purviance joining me here on the show. You can find him at his website, jamiepurviance.com, on Instagram and Twitter at Jamie Purviance. Jamie, this book, the Weber's Ultimate Grilling, a step-by-step guide to barbecue genius, is one that is being billed as the most forward-thinking, visually instructive, and easy-to-use grilling books ever published. Do your other cookbooks take offense?
No, not at all. I tell you, I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Weber's Way to Grill. It was the most successful book to date. I mean, it sold millions of copies all over the world. It still sells really well in Europe, and I think you can still get it here in the U.S. But the thing about that book, we tried to figure out, why was it working so well? What did people love about it? It had a fair amount of step-by-step photography and a pretty good emphasis on techniques. Like, okay, here's the recipe, but here's what you really need to focus on if you want some top quality results. So this book is just taking that approach and just blowing it much bigger and greater. So instead of having, 3 or 4 step-by-step photos with each recipe, there are 8, 10, sometimes, 15 or 20 photos, because I think that's what people were really responding to. I mean, obviously the food has to be good. It has to taste great at the end. So the recipe's got to be really solid, but it's the instruction in that step-by-step photography that people seem to respond to then, and I hope we'll respond to even more now, because there's just a lot more of it.
Jamie Purviance joining me here on the show. Is there a point to which you can give too much information? In other words, can somebody look at a book that is really directionally driven and go, okay, well, I cannot deviate at all, otherwise everything is going to go south? Or if I don't have this ingredient, I'm not going to be able to diverge. Can you have too much instruction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've certainly looked at books. Some of the textbooks that I used when I was in cooking school were kind of like that, where it was so intense. It was literally a textbook. You just thought, this sucks. I don't want to do this. It sounds like a chemistry experiment, and I'm going to do something wrong. And of course, there was the chef there looking over your shoulder and his thick German accent telling you what a lousy cook were, and you never make it in this industry. So anyway, I've seen those kinds of books and definitely wanted to steer away from that. This sort of gets into how you make a book, how you design a book, so that just visually it's very welcoming. It's very easygoing, if you will. You got to have a variety of styles. You can't put too much text on any page. There's a lot of information here, but you'll see when you look in the book, I think you've got a copy. It's sort of like looking at a little video, which is cool because it's like a film strip where you've taken out all the most important points. And you almost don't even have to read the recipe. You just sort of watch the images go by step by step and think, oh, I can do that. And that was always my goal. I never wanted to make, the most complicated recipes. Ultimate doesn't mean super intense. You're going to spend 3 days at this. Ultimate to me, well, actually, I was just writing about this for a blog. To me, it's more of like a feeling that you get, like when you're sitting down you're enjoying the spread that you've made, and you got your friends around, and you think, wow, that food, that came out really well. And I did that. That is cool.
Mhm.
You know, to me, that's like the ultimate feeling. That's what I'm trying to get to in Weber's Ultimate Grilling.
So in this book, do you try and focus on spending a certain percentage of the book dedicated to the beginner and then to the intermediate and to the expert, or can you not build a book in relation to those levels of expertise?
You know, I think when you write a book, certainly when I write a book, it's almost always to that entire spectrum. You just have to. It's tough enough to sell books in this world.
Mm.
You got to pick a pretty wide audience. And then, as I said, you got to package the information or design it in a way that the beginners kind of know where to go. You know, they're attracted to certain things. The advanced people know where to find that stuff. They'll look for those techniques. But, you know, to your point about beginners, I start out the whole thing with what I call the 4 T's, which I've come to understand is like the fundamentals of how to do stuff right at the grill. Most beginners are scared of the grill, frankly. They look at it like this big, hot, burning thing and thinking, you know, I'm going to get hurt or I'm going to screw up dinner or whatever. And so I say, look, focus on these 4 T's. Focus on temperature. That is, you know, get the grill to the right temperature. Time, know how long that food's going to be on there. Use the right technique, and that can be as simple as knowing whether it's direct or indirect or something more intense like cold cooking or cedar planking or something like that. And then just have the right tools for the job. If you nail those 4 things, those 4 T's, you are well on your way to success. So that's kind of how I bring the beginners in and make them more comfortable and more successful. And then later on in the book, I get into the stuff for the advanced people.
Obviously, you love all the recipes, of course, but are there a few that stick out as personal favorites?
Yeah, there are. You know, I heard you talking a lot about meat and steak tonight, which is always a favorite of mine as well. Did a lot of cool stuff with steak in this book. You know, it's primarily a technique book, as I've said. So I wanted to cover the variety of ways that you can approach cooking a steak. Everything from what I call the sear and slide, you know, where you sort of sear it over direct heat and slide it over to indirect, cold cooking it, reverse sear, of course, cooking it on a griddle or a plancha. There's one recipe that I just did with a porterhouse steak, although you could do it with really uncut. It's a sear and slide, but then it's finished with this really nice cipollini, sort of red wine braised cipollini onions, where you put them in a little griddle pan with some butter, brown them up, get them nice and sweet and caramelized, and then you add red wine and stock and balsamic vinegar, brown sugar, a little bit of bay leaf. Let that reduce down till it gets really syrupy. It's kind of a sweet and sour, an agrodolce type of thing. And you put that over a really nice seared steak, and it's definitely a new favorite of mine.
So let's talk about the sear and slide technique, as you had mentioned. I mean, that had been the longest running standard of how to cook a steak forever and ever and ever. And then I would say over the last, let's say, 4 years or so, is it incorrect for me to say that that has started to trend down and the reverse sear has really started to take hold as being the favorite way of cooking a steak, especially as people leading classes to the backyard people?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the reverse sear is getting a lot of press because it's new and cool and everyone wants to try something different. And I could be wrong about this, but I'm guessing that if you were to go to everyone in America grilling a steak tonight, you know, I'd say 90% of them are probably just grilling it up over direct heat. It is the simplest way to go. Yeah, you might not get that incredibly wide swath of, you know, juicy red meat, but you're still going to get some really nice juicy meat if you do it properly. It's just easy and it works, which for most people is kind of the reason you grill, right? It's easy and delicious. So yeah, we can talk about reverse sear, and I love it, and it makes good press. But most people, I think, are still doing it the old school way.
So where do you fall out on the sous vide debate?
You know, I have no real interest in sous vide, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, if I go to a restaurant and somebody's sous videing something for me, great. All power to you. But I have no need for a sous vide machine in my house. I think it's kind of something that the press likes to latch onto. And I'm sure that if you're going for like the ultimate results, it's a great tool.
But I mean, don't you think as a population, I mean, everybody wants to shit all over the millennials here, but I think that group has really brought us into a whole different realism of where food is and what we want to know about our meat and the food that we're eating, and then techniques as well. Sous vide possibly being a shoot off of this, isn't it? I don't know if it's necessarily press per se that's really driving it, or the ability to just be exactly pinpoint accurate on temperature, not being able to, or not having the eventuality of overcooking like you would if you had it in a grill or a pellet cooker doing a reverse sear. Eventually it's going to overcook once it shoots past the temperature that you want it at. If you're not paying attention, it's not going to do that in a sous vide. And then you can take it out, dry it off, throw it on a hot cast iron pan or a hot grill, get that sear that you're looking for color-wise, and you have a perfectly cooked steak in the middle.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And, I'm all for the millennials being conscious about what we're eating and thinking about sustainability and all that. Totally on board with that. This idea of using sous vide or any sort of other sort of what I would call unnecessarily complicated equipment, to me is a distraction from what you can do with the grill by itself, right? So it's like, I don't know, if you play golf, I know a bunch of buddies who love golf, and they're always going out and buying the latest, new golf clubs made of some new titanium, this, that, with a different balance. And, it's going to give them another 20 feet of their driver or whatever. I'm thinking, if you took that money and you actually invested in some lessons instead, you might actually be a better golfer. So it's sort of the same thing for me with grilling. It's like, if you just learn how to grill properly, you're going to get some really great results. They may not be as great as, Thomas Keller's producing at the French Laundry in Napa Valley with his sous vide machine that you pay $300 or for whatever, but they're going to be really gratifying. And and there's also some pride too. And like, I did this myself, just me and the charcoal and the grill and a pair of tongs. I think it's pretty cool when you can totally satisfy yourself and your guests with great technique.
Jamie Purviance on the show talking about Weber's Ultimate Grilling, the new book that's released, a step-by-step guide to barbecue genius, available for sale everywhere, of course, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, blah, blah, blah. So go out and grab a copy if you don't have one yet. Have you ever done or would you ever consider doing a competitive steak cooking event?
I have never done one, no. Absolutely, I would. It sounds fun. Yeah.
So
I'm open to it. I guess it depends a little bit on the parameters. Some of them, they tie your hands behind your back and they make you, butcher the cow right there up on site. I'm just kidding, but they like to make these reality shows into something ridiculous. I'm not so much into that, but if I want to just go to a competition where everyone's got the same steak and the same basic pantry,
yeah,
and let's see who's got the best technique, I'm all for that.
So, I mean, the question's a little loaded on my end, and I'm not surprised that you're a competitive guy and that you wouldn't mind taking part as long as the field is or the landscape is the same. And so, like an SCA event, for instance, everybody's going to cook a ribeye steak. There's a draw process. You can bring whatever cooker you want. You bring whatever seasonings and flavors you want. Certainly, there has seemed to have developed a certain way that the steak might have to look, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, that's just competition. Barbecue has gone down that path. Steak competition might be going down that path. But all that aside, it's as even as the playing field as you're going to be able to get without any real regulation on what you should or should not be using from a cooking and a seasoning standpoint. Long way to get to where I'm about to get. You're down with doing the competition stuff. It seems to me that a lot of people that would also be in your position, and I have asked this question to some of those other people, have zero interest in doing that. I think, because they perceive that would then put a chink in their credibility armor, if you will, or that the expectation would be that they go out and win because of what their name represents or how many books they have sold, this, that, and the other thing. But you're not necessarily akin to that line of thinking, which is refreshing, I guess.
Well, I can understand where they're coming from. I think, the idea is if you win, it's like, oh, well, he's a pro and he does this for a living, so it's not really fair. And if you lose, it's like, look at that big shot, he sucks. And so from that perspective, I can see why somebody wouldn't want to do it. To me, it just sounds like fun. If it's done right, if it's a good environment, if there aren't some wacky rules involved, and whether I win or lose, this stuff is so subjective anyway. I think, particularly if it's on television, I think it makes for good entertainment and actually education, because you see people using different techniques and creating different flavor profiles. I think, viewers would really benefit from that.
Jamie, from a barbecue Hall of Fame standpoint, if we could, weed out all the processes of how people would get inducted here in 2019, are there 2 or 3 people that you would just put right in right away if you could?
Oh, gosh. This isn't a topic that I follow very carefully. So I'll think of some people that I really respect. They may already actually be in there. I don't know. Bill Durney in Brooklyn, New York, at Hometown Barbecue. He's making some of the best barbecue that I've ever eaten, and I like his whole approach. I like the way that he involves his community, really reflecting the demographics there, and always paying homage to Louis Miller in Texas. I think he would be right up there at the top of the list. I think Chris Lilly is already in, right?
Yes.
Didn't he get in last year? Yeah,
a couple years ago.
Chris has been a friend of mine for a long time, and just an amazing ambassador for the whole sport of barbecue. Who else? Well, there's this guy in Cleveland. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he does this radio show, this internet show that's really good and informative. He has on some of the greatest guests that you can imagine. I don't know how much he pays them, but somehow he gets some really top-notch
Talking
people.
about me. I just figured it out. You're talking. Look at this guy, man. This is why Jamie Purviance is my favorite guest every time he comes on. There's no doubt about it. It's kind of an awkward question being put on the spot like that, and who knows what the Barbecue Hall of Fame really means to. Or that's why I like to just strip all the stuff away and just say, hey, who do you like? And I guess that kind of leads me into my next question is from a live fire heroes standpoint, like who is your mentor or who do you look up to when you think about writing a new cookbook or somebody that has inspired the way you cook or a style?
Well, I got to tip my hat to Stephen Reichlin because when I was just a little lad, I was in cooking school just learning how to do this stuff in a very basic way. I read his, I think Barbecue Bible might have been the first one.
Yep.
And it was eye-opening. I really loved the breadth of his information, the way that he wrote. He just had a great amount of authority and expertise. So I continue to watch his career, and he'll always be considered a mentor. I think my mentors now are not so much in the grilling and barbecue world, but maybe other food writers and chefs who are kind of breaking new ground. I'm thinking of people like Michael Pollan, who's written some really interesting stuff on food. Dan Barber, chef in New York, who's really doing some interesting things. My thing is kind of looking at those people and those kinds of restaurants and trying to sort of pull some of that perspective into the grilling and barbecue world rather than just kind of repeating what we've been doing for a long time.
Jamie Purviance joining me here on the show. If you want to check out his website, jamiepurviance.com, on Instagram and Twitter at Jamie Purviance, and grab a copy of the brand new book, Weber's Ultimate Grilling, a step-by-step guide to barbecue genius. Jamie, always appreciate the time that you give to the show, getting caught up, and hope to do it again soon.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for what you're doing.
There he is, Jamie Purviance, with the new book on the Fogo Charcoal Hotline, everybody. That's right. Weber's Ultimate